Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Nutty Professor, of course, which is currently on Netflix right now, the current of the second recording. There is also to be The Nutty Professor sequel, The Clumps, and also that is on Netflix currently right now. So, how do I feel about The Nutty Professor? Well, for a lot of people, people might have just loved this film because of the challenges that Eddie Murphy was to have to do. And I would say that really for this film, I think that's the only reason why I actually like this film is just because Eddie Murphy having to go through numerous things of makeup to have to go through all of these characters through this film really just has to give us a bravo performance for Eddie. And like from remembering his stand up from stuff like Raw and stuff like that, where it's like, good God, like I used to die laughing during like his stand up of Raw, where he's just taking the microphone and flinging it over his shoulder, like as if to metaphorically say that like there's to be one guy who has like a this microphone is basically the size of some guy's dick, and so going into this movie, I only like this movie just because of the challenges that Eddie Murphy was to go through to put this movie together. But this movie has to heavily rely on dinner sequences with the clumps. I honestly and truly believe that without those scenes, this is not much of a movie. Without the clumps being present in this movie would have not have been interesting to me. Like it just would have been either sad or depressing or just really just not that funny. So really realizing that eventually they banked on the fact of a sequel being put together where they focused upon that part really made us probably understand why Eddie Murphy later on eventually decided to probably do a lot easier projects just because of the challenge of these movies being put together. So, and eventually doing stuff like Norbit as well, as like doing all of that stuff, all of that challenge, those challenging things to consistently have to put together this stuff consistently. So, I really thoroughly would say that, or I would just say, where, so I would just say that this movie doesn't exactly hold up anymore. I don't think that this movie is as funny. I think that this movie heavily has to rely on jokes, which really is to, yeah, fart is always funny. And, but I think we also have to admit things kind of took this and kind of ran with it. There was a lot of stuff that eventually came to be similar to this, and then I think it ruined this movie. Where eventually we have stuff like in Tropic Thunder, where Jack Black is to try to pull off the whole Eddie Murphy thing and try to be five different people in one little skit that is to be in the Tropic Thunder movie that is to be just like the Nutty Professor. And like we start to see other things in other times where one person had been 10 different characters being placed into one shot. And so it starts to lose its luster after a while, after a number of other people had tried to do the exact same thing that this movie is to try to pull off. And at some point, maybe do their own little spin to make this so much more funnier than its original thing that had been put together, which was the Nutty Professor. Some people may not also know that this movie is actually to be a remake. The Nutty Professor originally, the original one was put together by Jerry Lewis of all people. So it's like, oh, even guy, that guy, like the guy who ended up doing the yearly like charity fundraising things for I don't know how long, the Jerry Lee Lewis Foundation thing. Um, he originally did the Nutty Professor also, and where that variation was way less challenging than what this was. Like it's this movie is also a remake. So this movie, like, its whole story is to actually just be remade, but done in a much more drastically different way, which a lot of people will just say, but yeah, but isn't this version better? Probably. I don't remember ever actually seeing the original version, but I would naturally assume that this movie has to be better just because it's a much more current version of it. So going in here, before I end up having to tee up this movie, there's also just some goofy things that I just don't understand about this film. I didn't understand the whole like hamster thing. Like I don't understand why that had to be a big part of this movie. Or there was to be this goofy joke where a hamster went into some guy's jeans and like was smacking around, and a woman's like, "Oh, is that his dangalang?" Like that part, I thought like still works, but I thought it was so goofy. I thought that part was still like was silly funny. Uh, and there was like the whole part where like we eventually forcibly have so many dream sequences in this film where Sherman is to eventually fall asleep and all of a sudden become this towering Godzilla character, and I'll talk about this more in spoilers, where eventually he's to fart and someone's to light a match, and then the world explodes because of giant fart. And I'm just like, okay, I can see where that part is still funny because I don't remember that part. But like, other than the dinner sequences with the clumps and farting, it's just nothing about this movie was to just be like, man, just still banging on all cylinders with this movie. No, like I just feel like this doesn't hold up because I've seen other variations of this kind of thing now, and it just kind of like doesn't have as fun a journey as say like a Coming to America movie would, or like any other kind of uh, Eddie Murphy movie. Just because really like there's some better stories in a lot of other Eddie Murphy films. In all honesty, that also are original. So with that said, and plus simple concept also in this film. So teeing it up, what is this movie about? Well, it seems like we have a character called Sherman who is to eventually decide that he otherwise wants to eventually lose weight, like any number of person. I think that's the real reason why this doesn't exactly hold up to me, honestly, because eventually I think that you yourself or a friend of yours or a family member or something, like we could all eventually say that in some part of our life we probably do have a person to us that feels like a Sherman. And so how exactly can we go and laugh at a person when we might have a Sherman in our life? Where really this movie just kind of becomes where it's just like, oh, you just feel sorry for this person who has never been with a woman or whichever, um, or like that this person is struggling uh, to eventually want to change his life. And so he has to go through a miracle elixir, so to speak, to try and change who he is, to eventually become a different persona or different person altogether. Plus, like this also reminds me of like Family Matters when Steve Urkel would change into Stefan. So it's kind of like to me this has kind of been done before, and too many kind of things. Man, do I love me some Family Matters. Frickin' Family Matters is a frickin' great show. Um, I think Family Matters still holds up because there's so many good characters in that show. Oh God, I should probably eventually go back. I should. Hopefully, there's a place to find Family Matters. I'll go and watch that show eventually. I'll probably forget about it as soon as this review's over. But I'm like, yeah, Family Matters. That was a great show. So, anyways, let's go on. Uh, so Sherman eventually, because of this miracle elixir, eventually turns into Buddy Love this overly confident a-hole of a person that is to have Buddy Love only care about Buddy Love, and that's basically it. Uh, like it's kind of like the whole like Jim Carrey mask scenario, where all of a sudden that eventually who Jim Carrey's character Stanley Ipkiss is to turn into is a person that is to no longer really care about love. He's just to care about like instead of Mrs. Right, it's Mrs. Right now because who really cares? Because the mask didn't really care about Charlize Theron's character. Eventually, once like he knew that he had grabbed her attention, like he just lost interest, and so Stanley Ipkiss wanted Cameron Diaz's character, and the mask could care less, just because he had lost interest and wanted to eventually just either wham bam thank you ma'am this woman and then just go on his way and do whatever he wants still, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of like in a lot of ways like you can kind of like compare the mask and the Nutty Professor almost like it's pretty much almost the exact same kind of characters, with the exclusion of the professor actually coming up with this concoction, where Stanley Ipkiss just happened to stumble upon the mask one night. So going on into this, let's go out of our way to say that it's about that customary time, because I've already been talking about this for almost 12 minutes. So let's go into that double five time territory, because it's that customary time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time we can spoil this movie. I hope I can roughly get everything correct, because there's a lot of small bit events that happen throughout this movie, and then we have to re-go back over those certain kind of events as a different person, which is to mean we get a whole layer of events as the Nutty Professor, and then we have to go and revisit them basically as Buddy Love. So let's go into this. Let's go into the spoilers of this film. So really, we kind of get the introduction of this movie of all of a sudden having within the science experimental place of this like college that they are to be in, all of a sudden all these hamsters or guinea pigs or whatever, they all get loose from this school. And so we just see all these hamsters just all roaming around, all just wreaking havoc. It seems like there's a billion of them for some freaking reason. But then it seems that eventually, once they get to obtain all these hamsters again, eventually it seems like there is way less than there actually was in the introduction of this scene. Maybe because some of them went lost. So eventually we have Sherman, who is to all of a sudden realize that all these hamsters have bizarrely gotten loose for whatever reason or another. I'm assuming because there's an obvious scene where Sherman is to accidentally hit some kind of button or accidentally hit something that is to unlock every single one of these cages that all these hamsters are to be in. And I guess he ends up doing that seemingly multiple times. So Sherman eventually is to go into his science lab and find out that it seems that their heaviest hamster was to take this potion or concoction or whatever you want to talk about it, or however they say it in this film. Eventually, is to lose three sizes, and it seems that this hamster has maintained this weight loss, and so it doesn't seem like the hamster has drastically changed from what they were to, like it seems like the hamster went perfectly well to where the hamster doesn't really drastically change anything or like as much as like Eddie. But I guess for Eddie, like the escalation of maybe a larger sized being would eventually have a much more shorter shelf life than, I guess, within this hamster. Here's also this interesting thing that I just thought of now. Like, this basically is a transformation film. You know how in a lot of, like, they used to do, like, a lot of these switcheroo kind of movies where eventually someone would take this potion and eventually come, like, completely different person? There was this one movie where eventually a guy would take this potion and change into a woman, and like, so that was a drastic change. But like, I can't help but also like remember, like, the Nutty Professor is almost like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like, I think that's also why I can enjoy this movie also, because it kind of feels like that with a comedic angle to it. And like, so there is a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of thing going on here, which then we start to see a lot of potion movies where eventually people are to take certain kind of potions to eventually change into different people for whatever reason, and then eventually be killers for whatever reason. So, but anyways, so Sherman is to go on to see Dean Richmond, and so, and we also have a moment where Sherman was going into his class and trying to put this formula upon his chalkboard, and his stomach was wiping away uh, the formula that was on the bottom of the blackboard or the chalkboard, like he was wiping it away with his stomach by accident, and everyone was laughing. And so and that eventually chimes in a woman named Carla Purdy, or Miss Purdy, uh, who eventually kind of stumbles upon this office, or upon this classroom, to eventually like just kind of introduce herself and just like, oh, well, I'm a grad student and I've really enjoyed your work, blah 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 blah. So like, there's the introduction of this person, but while Sherman is to eventually make his way to this woman, he ends up kind of like knocking over like all of these, like this big huge jar of M&Ms or jeans or whatever this is, these little marbles. And he ends up doing that multiple times in this movie. I'm like, so like, is that just supposed to be the gag consistently, that everywhere Sherman is to go, he's to knock this thing over, to where like he just can't avoid knocking it over? Or maybe they were going to use that part in one clip and then they reused it here because continuity errors. They just naturally assumed that, oh, like maybe we didn't use that before, maybe we'll use it here. And then they realized after the film was over, oh, we used that to gag twice. I thought we did something different earlier. Meh, I guess not. So, uh, so like I said, Sherman is to eventually go to Dean Richards, and so Sherman is to have this complicated thing with being able to sit in this chair, which I'm just like, wow, that seems like a awful thing to do. To now have this person have to like suck in their breath to just try and sit in this chair. I'm like, yeah, I could just imagine going into numerous places and like, for being like a really tall guy or whichever, like there are some really just crappy chairs, and really just not being able, I'm like, this is the most uncomfortable chair I've ever been in, and I have to sit here for how long? And I'm just like, can we get another chair? And they're like, I'm sorry, this is all we have. And I'm like, well, I don't like this chair. Um, but there isn't anything else. So it's just like, God, you people are cheap. Or God, you people should have came up with a chair that can fit everybody. But it is what it is. So Sherman is to sit with Dean Richards, and a bunch of this dialogue that Dean Richards is to have like really is lost on me, because the entire time we're just seeing a hamster poop upon this guy's coffee. So I'm just distracted by that, and like dialogue is basically going out the window. But really, the dean is just to be upset, really, about the ridiculous display of hamsters that are all over the front of this campus, and that the dean is also to be upset because he had lost one of their sponsors because of that whole hamster issue, because she had almost accidentally swallowed one of the hamsters. So I'm assuming whoever was the random woman who was almost swallowing a hamster, that would have had to have been the funded woman. So Dean Richmond is to tell Sherman, you need to come up with something that's just going to blow the socks off of our next sponsor, because this guy is going to put $10 million upon my pocket. And so you need to come up with something that's just going to blow him away to where he just will desperately want to spend these $10,000 or $10 billion. I mean, so, and Dean is to also mention, it's like, and if you don't like wow this guy, I am going to choke you. I am going to literally suck the life out of you until you pass away. So Sherman is now under the gun to have to perform, and so eventually we have Sherman, who is to eventually the very first thing that we are to really just see in this movie is like Sherman waking up for the day, seeing a Richard Simmons like Sweating to the Oldies video, where like, I'm sorry, Eddie Murphy as Little Richard is just this like annoying voice, in all honesty. Like, I get that character is to also be that too. I remember watching Richard Simmons videos and like Sweating to the Oldies and doing whatever to just like, especially during summer times when there was like, hey, just go out and do something. I don't know. Like, so, um, plus when you're young, like you don't really want to do anything athletic because really you're just like, I'm not going to lose weight. like, I'm not gonna like what do I need to lose weight for? Like I'm skin and bones anyways, so like what's the point of like being athletic? Like I'll be athletic in my later years just because like reasonably like I was skin and bones when I was younger, and really it took me to eventually get to high school where I started to actually started to put on weight, because I would just like eating wasn't really a like a big thing for me. Like I would just have like 1 to 2 big meals, and that would be about it for a whole entire day. Kind of like how it is now, where it's just like I'll have like a 1 or 2 big meals, and like I just don't really care um, about eating as hefty as I was before. So, uh, so going into here, we have eventually Sherman going home, watching these these tapes with the Eddie Murphy version of Richard Simmons, and we just see these things where a woman is to talk about how she like lost weight and then cried. I'm like, yeah, like eventually the whole like Richard Simmons thing eventually died off to there to eventually be this show called The Biggest Loser. And then all of a sudden The Biggest Loser came out and everybody was like, oh my god, I gotta watch this show. And then all of a sudden like that show just died, because eventually you either found out like a lot of the people who ended up losing a ton of the weight gained it all back, or you would find out that a lot of people were just going in there just to play the game of things, and it was just like, wow, that is not sending a good message. Like, that just makes me want to just not support the show, because everybody is to have like rigged this contest, and that seems like an awful thing. And more than likely, you could probably just be like, well, who knows how many people had probably rigged the show during the whole entire iteration, and we're just seeing that now during the later seasons. But it was like that show just sent the wrong message, where it's just like, man, I wish we could have had much more like I actually thoroughly enjoyed like gym shows, like shows where eventually you were to like focus on like personal trainers and stuff like that, kind of doing their job. Like, I thought those shows were kind of fun, like the more athletic parts of shows where you would kind of see uh like stuff like that, where it's much more like personal trainers, or it'd be uh like something that was to try and gain muscle upon people. I love watching the Celtic Warrior workout, where you're just seeing like Sheamus, who's a WWE star, who eventually just works out with other athletes and kind of goes. I love that show. I love that YouTube channel. That was a great channel. I really thoroughly enjoyed that. And every once in a while, I'll pop in to see what he's doing now, because a lot of times it's kind of like reusing of footage, especially when it was like whole like uh the new normal era, let's just say, where it was getting kind of difficult for gyms to even be open. So it was kind of like, yeah, all the WWE guys are gonna be stuck in the performance center. Oh, that's great. So anyways, pushing on. I got a little off track there, I apologize. So anyways, the Sherman eventually is to have dinner with his family, and uh and so eventually uh we have supposedly got Mama Clump, who is to mention about getting colon cleansed. And that's when like Papa Clump is like, I'll give you colon cleansed. And like we also have like God, what is it? God, what is the kid's name? Ernie Clump Jr. Ernie is to go on and go, and it's like, oh, that's my, that's my little baby, Hercules, Hercules. Like, freaking like, why do we have these? Like, this is so funny, but I'm also just like, why do we have these scenes? They're funny, but then it's just like, why? Why is just farting funny? Just that, just just that, just and like we have the papa clump, who's just like, yeah, I'll show you colon cleanse. And we have the grandmother's like come on, Cletus. like you want you want you want. Like, freaking, you got the grandma clump freaking just like spouting out all of her like craziness, where she used to talk about her like sex escapades, and how she's like mentioning how like consistently, especially when uh Purdy eventually goes into the dinner table, she's to mention about her times when, like, yeah, me and my husband used to go into the woodshed and you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just like, what are these? Like, these scenes are hilarious, but why? Like, God, like, because I know we have so many people in our family that are just to like any family, not just saying my own. Like, there's always to be that person who is just be that person that is like, why are you saying all this? Why do you have to deem to say all this? Like, if anything, you should be a person that should just check your filter before you end up blurting out whatever you're going to blurt out. But yeah, so but yeah, like we have Grandma Clump, who's eventually when Papa Clump is to eventually just and like eventually we have like grandma who's like grabbing a knife and like I'm gonna throw this at you, Cletus. And like there's this like hilarious banter that everyone's having, like Hercules, Hercules, and like that became a thing. That weirdly, that Hercules moment just became a thing for whatever reason, where eventually someone was to fart and you're to be like Hercules, Hercules. I'm like, why did that become a thing? Why? But it just did. It blew up. It heavily blew up. But yeah, so eventually all this dinner talk is just to eventually get Sherman to kind of just feel better about himself. And so eventually both the mother and Sherman are to eventually have this one nice little moment where like the mother is just trying to comfort Sherman and then kind of let him be on his way. Uh, Even though still, yeah, there is some moments where the mother is still gonna like mention to the father Clump about certain kind of things, or Cletus. You want it. Like, Grandma Clump kind of really sells this movie, but I think in the sequel of this, it goes really too far, where eventually, like we have too many scenes, I think, with Grandma Clump, where like especially that spot with both, like we have Buddy Love and we have like Grandma Clump, and they're kind of in this like garage or something together, and eventually like Grandma Clump is wanting to jump on Buddy Love, and Buddy Love's like ah like, he's scared. And but yeah, so we have that whole moment where Sherman is like playing, or Eddie Murphy is kind of playing with numerous people that are himself, and we get the funny, hilarious farting moment that just keeps on going on until eventually Cletus is like, "Oh, I missed myself," and then he has to leave the kitchen because he farts too often. So, because everybody is starting to talk about dieting, and everybody is starting to talk about kind of like Sherman's like diet and stuff like that. So, uh, so we have eventually Sherman, who is to go to Purdy's home and ask her out. And here's the funny thing. So when Sherman is to eventually go to ask Purdy out, Purdy is to mention that there is to be this club out called Scream. And I'm like, what kind of club would have that name? Plus, also, is this just a reference to Purdy being in Scream 2? Like, what time did Scream 2 come out, and what time did like Jada Pinkett Smith eventually do this movie? Because I'm kind of wondering why they call the club Scream, because that seems like a weird club name. So Purdy is to mention like, oh hey, like, do you want to go to this club named Scream? And Sherman goes like, yeah, of course I'd go to Club Scream. Like, ooh yeah, you gotta scream it. It keeps the flame in, and like, and like hey, like everybody's got to scream. So like yeah, so all of a sudden we have this one nice moment where Sherman is to eventually go to his place, like his apartment, and just to be happy that he has a date. Just be like, yes, I have a date. Tomorrow night at 8. It will be so great. And so eventually he ends up turning on some music and ends up starting to spout out the music. I don't remember what the music was. And eventually his neighbor is banging from another guy, hey, knock down that noise down there, up there, and whatever. Like, and so, like, Sherman's like, oh, I'm sorry, sorry, my neighbor. So yeah, Sherman is to just be so excited and just be so thrilled about being able to just go on a date because he probably has never had or has never gone on a date with anyone. Um, and so, like, eventually, when Purdy is to go to see like the Clumps, there's to be that one interesting part where Grandma Clump is like, "Hey, like you gotta like." You really gotta be prepared for going after Sherman, Purdy, because freaking like he's been building all that up, and eventually that's just gonna just explode all over you. And like Grandma Clump talked about one time how like uh, she used to see some star or something like that, and it used to get her really moist. I'm like, I thought like girls didn't like that word, but I guess like Grandma Clump, I guess that's fine for her to use that word. Um, but yeah, so because we got freaking Grandma Clump like take him into the woodshed and just go on and on and on. I don't know how long that I like. There was this one point when, like, kind of after I'd see this movie, where I would just go and do the grandma voice a lot, just to have people laugh. Like I would really go out there and just be like, oh yeah, just get a laugh at people, or just to get a laugh with people, just to use that voice, just because that voice is kind of be like, especially if you kind of throw it out there anywhere, it starts to get really funny when especially you continue to use it because it's just some like creepy Esh like voice. It's like, yeah, take him out of the woodshed and just, yeah. Just really, there'll be some real screaming going out. You know what I'm saying? You don't need no club to be any screaming, if you know what I mean. That sounded weird, and it went that way. So Sherman goes out to go to this Scream Club, and we of course end up getting, of course, the talents of Montel Jordan. Man, this also just gives us a good like setup. Freaking Montel Jordan, like this is how we do it. It's Friday night. Yeah, freaking Friday night was a date that they were gonna have together. And God, was that like such a good throwback to have like Montel Jordan doing like this is how we do it. Freaking like that song was awesome. So we have both Purdy and Sherman both enjoying this club night, and so all of a sudden we get this talented man called Dave Chappelle. I don't know if you've ever guys have heard of this guy. I think he did some movies and a gigantic show on Comedy Central called The Dave Chappelle Show that is legitimately just the most just God, that show was just freaking amazing. The Dave Chappelle Show, everything that was presented in the Dave Chappelle Show, I watched the crap out of that, and I laughed so hard during a lot of that show. Here, not so much, just because, like, a lot of the jokes that Dave Chappelle was to supposedly have to put together here was just to rag on all of the audience. And honestly, some of the comedic stuff that he was to present was to seem old fashioned or to seem just like he's heckling people of the audience, which just kind of doesn't sit well. Like, it is kind of interesting, though, how there is to be one woman that Reggie Warrington is to make fun of in this early part of the movie. They end up reusing her in a later part of the film when Buddy Love is to go and grab some women at some certain table, and coincidentally, this same extra just so happens to be in another scene where eventually she is to end up in supposedly Sherman's bedroom. So I'm like, okay, so like this extra just eventually just became like part of this film. So going in here, so all of a sudden we start to see people getting made fun of. And so Sherman is to immediately think that he's like, oh my God, I'm probably going to get make fun of. And maybe I should start getting out of here, or maybe I should go to the bathroom, or maybe whichever. There's also this spot where Sherman was to try to make his way to the table with Purdy and start to knock a lot of people's like drinks out of their hand or something like that because these tables were too closed in. I guess with probably social distance now, that probably is not going to be a problem, right? So Sherman is eventually wanting to try and get the heck out of there to eventually avoid getting a butt of a joke by Reggie, but sadly enough, we have Reggie who ends up spotting Sherman's butt and making fun of it. And then just continues to make fun of how big Sherman is, to where eventually Sherman and Purdy eventually leave. And so eventually Purdy is to like apologize to Sherman about the whole jokes that were being done, but like the damage was already to be done, to where eventually Sherman goes home and is to go and go on to watch Richard Simmons like kind of doing this interview with this woman who ends up crying about her losing weight. And so all of a sudden Sherman, who is eating ice cream, is all of a sudden crying for that moment, which is understandable. And so now we have a moment again, or we have like twice in this movie where Sherman is to eventually fall asleep while watching TV. And we have one dream sequence where Sherman, of course, is to be like at this hospital because the doctors are to turn and say, like, this man is just getting fatter. And it's like, okay, this just doesn't seem that funny at all. It's just. So all of a sudden, like, Sherman is to start to balloon into this Godzilla like character. And he is now, like, roaming through the streets, I guess, like a Stay Puft Marshmallow like character. And the size of Godzilla or Stay Puft or whoever, it doesn't matter. It's the same old. It's almost like it's probably more of a better example of King Kong than anything else because it feels like that familiar territory. So eventually, Sherman is kind of like going through the town, just rumbling and grabbing and chucking and whatever. So then Sherman eventually makes his way to where we would naturally assume Purdy's room and going and grabbing her, but instead he ends up grabbing for a chicken leg that is about the size of his, like a barely, and he's like, why? Why did I have to act that out? And so then all of a sudden Sherman is like, woo, and then he's to realize that he has to fart. And so everybody's like, get ready, everybody, he's gonna fart. Like something like that. Like, brace for impact, he's gonna toot. He's gonna rumpus. He is gonna out the side of him. Watch out, everybody. So all of a sudden Sherman is a and all of a sudden there's to be this one guy who's like, I'm gonna light a smoke with my match, and then the police officer's like, no! Nuclear bomb goes off because someone decided to light a match while someone else farted, and nuclear bomb destroys the world, and all of a sudden Sherman is to wake up. And so Sherman is to just decide that he's like, you know what, I can't take this anymore. I already have an experiment where a hamster has lost 3 sizes of weight. So how about I go and I concoct my own potion and I stay up all night trying to crunch the numbers to figure out all this to eventually have a human being able to be part of this whole process. So Eddie Murphy, of course, figures this whole thing out and then uh, takes the potion, drinks it up, and so then just like werewolf transformation, kind of, sort of. And so eventually, all of a sudden, we have Sherman, who ends up turning into Buddy Love, who all of a sudden, Buddy Love is like, oh my God, like, it's hard to do normal Eddie Murphy voice now that I've done Sherman. I'm done. Cletus. You want and you want and so Buddy Love just goes off and is like eating every single hamburger, and all this kind of stuff. Oh, I forgot about the exercise montage. So we had a moment within this movie where eventually, where Sherman was to try and work out, but eventually he wasn't as coordinate, but he wasn't as good to match up with a lot of the aerobics women that he was trying to do these dances with. Anytime that he was to jump on this mini tramp thing, he was to just basically just stand on top of it compared to everyone else. And Sherman was to try to like run up these stairs like Rocky did, and he just couldn't do it. Like, it was really hard for him to try to do any number of things. One guy was trying to lift up this dumbbell, and Sherman was lifting up this Snickers bar and trying to eat it. There was also this point in where after Sherman's class, there was to be a point where Sherman has a secret stash of candy, and so he ends up eating the Snickers and try to toss this Snickers wrapper into the trash, and he ends up missing. And so, anyways, pushing on. So eventually, when Buddy Love is to come into fray, Buddy Love is to eventually go into this athletic like sports place and to want to buy things that has spandex to make it be that like he has like the tightest shirt that he can possibly afford. And like, so he's wearing like almost wrestling gear, like he's wearing like onesies, or like God, what is the perfect word for this? Like he's using like he's doing like wrestling, anyways. So eventually he ends up doing this aerobics, and he ends up like being like way more like into it than anyone else is. While he's doing this, he's like, yeah, like, I ain't got no titties. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, like, you have great ones, but nah, I don't have mine anymore. It's like, good God. So, I don't know why I said that. I probably should not have, because that's probably accumulated as a cuss word. Oh, no. So, so Buddy Love goes and eats all this food, and it's just like shoving his face with food. And here's the thing. So eventually, Purdy eventually finds Buddy Love kind of doing things into this this science lab. And so Buddy Love just works it out to where Buddy Love is to mention that Sherman is to be off, and so Buddy Love is kind of taking over his science experiments. He's kind of watching over them. So it seems that eventually we have Purdy, who's just kind of interested in Buddy Love because of his eyes, how his eyes seem so kind, but maybe his lips don't quite match what Purdy is to see from uh, Buddy Love's eyes. So, but Purdy is to eventually easily accept a date with Buddy Love because Buddy Love is like, "Hey, let's go to Scream. Let's go to Scream and let's go out there and we'll have a good time." So Purdy, of course, says yes to this. So they go out to Scream, and so what ends up happening is this time around, Buddy Love is to kind of change things around, where eventually when Reggie is to come out there, Buddy Love is to heckle the crap out of Reggie and to be the person that laughs the most out of everyone purposely, so that way eventually uh, Reggie will call him out because he is way far from the stage than where Sherman was, where he was right up front. So eventually, since Reggie has no material to make fun of Buddy Love this time around, because there is no like defect, or there is nothing about reasonably Buddy Love this time around to make fun of. All of a sudden, Reggie just has your mother jokes, and it's like, okay, this seems very old fashioned, but like this doesn't in the best way showcase Dave Chappelle, but like it was just to get Dave Chappelle work, because I'm sure there's a lot of desperate comedians that need work, and like they want to be seen in a different medium or a different light to eventually get them to where they eventually need to be, where they can have FU money and a farm somewhere and just be able to just do whatever they want and retire if that's what they want to do. So, uh, so because I followed kind of Dave Chappelle's stand up like after kind of the whole like me seeing Half Baked and me watching the Chappelle show, and like I followed his stand up and stuff like that, and kind of having him also being like doing like Saturday Night Live after such X amount of time, and so on and so forth. So uh, so eventually Eddie is to fire back at Reggie with some your mother jokes of his own, and so everybody's just dying laughing for whatever reason, and so eventually what ends up happening is just we just have Buddy Love that just runs up on the stage and is like ha 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 ha, and so all of a sudden like Reggie just starts to get defensive with some just random dude upon his stage, and so because like there's this whole back and forth continually going between both of them, like Reggie just finally decides that he wants to just fight Buddy Love, and so all of a sudden Reggie is to take off his hat to all of a sudden find out that there is to seemingly be this like Mohawk style of I want to be sensitive here, uh, like this beaded kind of Mohawk, or this kind of like done in a certain way kind of Mohawk. I don't know what style that is, but it looks like a Mohawk, but I'm not quite sure exactly what that is. Certain kind of style of hair. So all of a sudden we have now Buddy Love making fun of Reggie's hairstyle, and so eventually Buddy Love is just owning the stage, and eventually he ends up just like bashing freaking Reggie literally, and to the point where both Buddy Love and Reggie are sharing like a piano together, and so Buddy Love is to recreate this song, "Loving You is Easy 'Cause You're Beautiful," and all of a sudden we have the do 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 do, and all of a sudden we have Reggie, who ended up getting injured, to have to scream "Ow!" like freaking, and then eventually we have Buddy Love who chucks Reggie into the piano, and like that's it for that act. So eventually, we have just Purdy, who eventually is to just really just not like Buddy Love. It's just like, God, this guy is just too much. And so eventually Purdy is to just want to leave. And so Buddy Love is to give, of course, the check, or to pay a credit card with the check. And we end up finding out that Sherman Clump's assistant, who is to eventually, I don't see him anywhere. Oh, his name is Jason. Eventually, he spots the credit card and like, hey, that's not Sherman Clump. And so all of a sudden, it's to try to track down this Buddy Love guy, and eventually, this guy is to be owning a Viper uh, because he doesn't actually have a car, evidently. So all of a sudden, Jason is to chase after Buddy Love to eventually find out that that Buddy Love is changing into Sherman within the car, to eventually have Sherman eventually like just stuck into this car, and they have to get the jaws of life out to try to pry Sherman from this car. And so the very next day, Sherman is to have to go into the office to talk to Dean Richmond about the whole car situation, because it's like, hey, like, you put like a massive car on your on your funds account. Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why did you put this money on here? Or why did you put this car in here? This doesn't make sense. Like, you couldn't have gotten a reasonable car to be able to like move around in, like, or you could have walked like any normal person. So eventually, this just leads to eventually Sherman going on and having a date with Purdy at his home, because it seems that everything is going well. I'm going to have to pause here for a second. All right. Because eventually Purdy talks to the Nutty Professor about her dating Buddy Love. And the Nutty Professor, Sherman, is completely fine with it. And if anything, like, Sherman is to even want to put in a good word for Purdy with Buddy Love. So eventually we have Purdy going with Sherman to see the Clumps. And so now we get these scenes, of course, like, we get these spots again where like everybody is already kind of talking that like Purdy and Sherman are gonna get like married and everything like that. They're already talking about like where the wedding is gonna be held, and we have like Sherman who's like, shut up. I'll get my knife out and I'll freaking. So, and we all of a sudden again have Cletus, who's just away, because that's all, like, that's his joke, that's his thing. Every time at the dinner table he has to, and eventually he's like, oh, I messed up my pants, and like, oh, I just crapped myself. So like, that's his joke. So so eventually everybody is talking about where the wedding is going to be held. Everybody is almost talking that maybe Purdy is maybe batting for the other team, let's just say, and that maybe like there might be some complications on what church that they should go to. And it's like, what the heck is all this dialogue? all of this like rushing into like this is like the second date of these people. Like I wouldn't be thinking about how they're going to be renewing their vows in a week from now. Just kind of let this play out. But so eventually, this is where grandmother Clump is to eventually just talk about how really just Sherman has been uh, like holding himself for or saving himself for 30 some odd years, and so like God, Grandma Clump is just like, yeah, like releasing all that thing after 34 years is just that man's gonna explode. Just like, we just have Sherman who's grabbing his knife. He's like, I will kill you. Like and so, but we have all these family members that are being just so goofy to this woman, and so eventually after that whole get together, and eventually all after all that goofy stuff is going on, so uh, so eventually Buddy Love or the Sherman is to eventually almost decide maybe he no longer needs Buddy Love. That maybe because when he's talking to Jason, Jason is mentioning to Sherman that the confidence level of this character Buddy Love is way off the charts, and maybe it's way too dangerous to eventually have Buddy Love here consistently. So we get Sherman who's like, you know what, this is probably right. Like maybe I don't need this character anymore. Like he's also like almost ruining my life anyways. Cause eventually, excuse me, eventually what ends up happening is Sherman is to just go on and want to use his shakes, uh, his milkshakes or whichever to eventually uh, like there's a lot of times where, like I don't know how like shakes exactly would work to lose weight. Like especially if it's a milkshake. If you think about it, milkshakes like I can understand like certain kind of like creams and stuff like that, some kind of like powders and stuff like that. But I still can't think of how you can lose weight via that. Like I can understand God, what is it? Like if you were to work out and you were to also have like certain supplements like protein, whey protein, or creatine supplements or something like that to go with the workout, like I can understand how you could probably lose weight from that, but I don't understand how exactly you can lose weight from like I know there's like fat burners and stuff like that out there that eventually came years later. Uh, but I don't quite understand how exactly any of that stuff that was to be presented in this movie was to work as like a weight loss supplement or whatever. Because a lot of times you would get certain places that were to say that they were weight loss things, but they would also be offering like ice cream bars, which I'm like, okay, how is exactly that's healthy? Or you would get a lot of these weight loss things that would bizarrely have these things like, oh, you can have a Reese's cup basically. And I'm like, okay, how is that a healthy option? I don't know. Like, you would probably have to really just dip down into some real serious, just like, hey man, I'm eating salads. I'm going to be vegan or I'm going to be whatever. Because a lot of people went to those kind of life changing things to eventually drop the weight. Like, I'm not going to name names because that's insensitive. So, but there's several celebrities that have that kind of lifestyle. So, going in here, what eventually happens is Sherman is to take one of his shakes and all of a sudden realize that there is to be the Buddy Love potion in there. And so all of a sudden, Sherman is to change into Buddy Love. So, because eventually what ends up happening is Buddy Love goes out again with Purdy to this nice dinner, and Sherman has to also perform to this Harland Hartley 10 millionaire guy. So we're kind of to have to kind of do this whole like Mrs. Doubtfire act here, where we got two different people that are to be needed in one spot. And so we all of a sudden have Buddy Love, who is a part of this restaurant, to go with Purdy, and this all of a sudden is to have Dean Richmond, who's like, hey, like, where is Sherman? I've been looking for him all over the place. He needs to go and wow this rich guy for us to get our funding. And so Purdy is just to mention, well, hey, Buddy Love, you've been looking over Sherman's stuff anyways. How about you go out there and how about you wow this guy and try to get the funding because you know all of Sherman's work. So Buddy Love is like, oh, great, yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. So Buddy Love just goes out there, scribbles some equation, and it's like, okay, like, I'm going to explain all this to you in a minute. And he just scribbles something on some chalkboard and then leaves. And Dean Richards is like, whoa, 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 can't you layman terms what that is? And so Buddy Love says, surely, like, do you see this pork chop right here and all the fat that it has? Well, like, I'm going to have this experiment. And he starts kind of like degrading some of the people in this room, where some people are to have certain kind of arms or certain kind of like body types and whatever. And so Buddy Love is to mention that I'm going to take all of that from one person and turn them into a perfect specimen that is to be like the one woman that is to look like here. And so all of a sudden Buddy Love starts going and sitting at this table and completely forgets about Purdy. And so, but Buddy Love is to mention that this concoction is going to take a much more heavier set person and turn him into a thinly laced specimen, which you of course will have seen towards the certain part of some table that Buddy Love is to sit in. So all of a sudden, Harland is just like, you know what? If he can actually pull this off, like, I'll give you guys the funding, whatever you guys need. If you are to have changed a much more heavier set person into a much more thinner person. Heavy set also sounds like a hard thing to kind of actually say. Like, heavy set could also mean that you're very muscular. Like, I don't know how many times that, like, there is actually some overly muscular people that like have a very small amount of like body fat upon their body that are to still also be called obese or obese. I mean, I apologize about saying that incorrectly. But yeah, like there is to be this bizarrish thing also where if you are to have massive muscular body, you're to still also to be called obese or fat because like you're to be too large for your body structure. To where if you're to be X amount of tall, then you should be X amount of weight. And so if you're to be a heavily muscular guy, like if you're to have huge gigantic calves, huge gigantic muscles, and whichever, and you're to be built like a freaking like Olympic athlete or whatever, like Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime or whichever, and you're still to be called fat, like that does not make sense to me. That's the thing that I hate the most about like going to a doctor and like they're just to say like, well, yeah, you're still like a really large for your like size, like because this number just says this, but like they don't actually like look at like fat percentage. They don't actually just go and just like like it seems like your body is X amount of percentage of body fat, because they never do that, because why would they? They just say it's like, well, like, even though you're built like a brick house, freaking like you're a professional athlete, you're still like X amount of weight, because heaven forbid you actually do body fat percentage in a doctor's office ever in your life. Because why would you do that? That's what ticked me off about going to a doctor, where it's just like, okay, like I would be like for example, I'd be like freaking 260 and I could bench like 290, and they're telling me, yeah, you're overweight, you should probably lose some weight. It's like, but I can bench like over 300 pounds almost at some point in time in my life, and but you're telling me that I'm not healthy. Like, whatever. But that was years ago. Like, I can't do that now. Anyways, like, getting out of hand, I apologize. Why did I go through this rant? So I apologize. So pushing on. So we go into this, and so Sherman eventually leaves with these women, completely forgetting about Purdy, because really just like Buddy Love pushes onto Purdy, like, hey, do you want to do some team activity? You want to just go and like do some bedroom business? Because like we didn't really even have this date, and so now all of a sudden I'm just gonna rush to go into the bedroom because these girls are interested. So all of a sudden that leaves to eventually have Buddy Love going back to his place, which is actually Sherman's, and having this ruckus party. And eventually, by the time that Sherman is to wake up, he is to have an eviction notice because of all the partying he was having. And so Sherman has, or Buddy Love has this ruckus party where he is to burn all of Sherman's like weight loss stuff. And eventually, when Sherman is to wake up the next day with three women upon his bed, Sherman is to eventually have Purdy be at his door, and all of a sudden find out that it seems that Sherman had been supposedly sleeping or sharing women with Buddy Love. And Purdy thought, excuse me, I don't know why I like just ate some. I like just ate some food because like heaven forbid I actually eat something. So now that's why I have this like like I have a lot of just built up in me. So I apologize. It's not very professional, but I apologize. Anyways, so and also I apologize about all the rants going into this one. So Sherman eventually is talking with Purdy, and one of the women eventually opened the door to be like, hey, where's Buddy Love? And so Purdy's like, oh my God, you're just as bad as he is. And it's like, well, you don't know the whole story because me and Buddy are one of the same. But Buddy is a completely different person than who I am. And plus, also, like, when really Purdy is to be and see Sherman with some women, like, there's to be one thing that it'd be like, hey, man, bravo for you. You actually had some women in your bedroom. Like, bravo for you. But, like, because they didn't cement, like, Purdy and Sherman didn't cement this relationship. Like, yeah, they went out twice, but, like, Purdy was already looking for Buddy Love. Like, she was looking for someone else. She was looking for someone else on the side. And so, all of a sudden, when Sherman is to be looking for women off to the side, because Purdy is much more interested in Buddy Love for some reason, then all of a sudden, like, Sherman is to be a bad guy? How does that work? When Purdy is to be looking for Buddy Love instead of Sherman, and so all of a sudden Sherman has some women in his bedroom. How exactly does that work out? Like, so it's got to be like one of those where like the woman could be kind of like looking around, but the guy has to just be like, oh, well, I'm just going to hold a torch for this woman. Like, that's when you have a lot of relationships that are just like, well, I just want to be open and I just want to say that we're going to be like, we're not going to be like sign, seal, deliver this whole relationship, or there's going to be certain relationships that I would much more like, where it'd just be like, okay, like it's going to be you and me and that's it. Like nobody else. They're like, okay, that's good because I wasn't going to go and be shopping around anyways. Because freaking why would I? You already have somebody. Let's go and shop around because like it's a waste of time and a waste of resources to be like, hey man, even though I have something already, I'm just gonna continue to look. Whatever. So Sherman blew it, and supposedly Jason makes his way to uh, eventually Sherman. It seems that there is to be this whole like thing where it seemed that Buddy Love had won over this Hartley guy so much more so that Dean Richards is wanting to replace Sherman with Buddy Love. Because it seems that Buddy Love is to easily win over this rich guy where Sherman couldn't. So Sherman is getting replaced by Buddy Love, and they are replacing the names on doors and everything like that to prove it. So now is to be the big moment where Sherman finally has to let everybody know what's really going on. Because also he has to reveal his potion to people also. So now here is when we get the real trick moment where Sherman was trying to get away from Buddy Love, but eventually he accidentally drinks the Buddy Love formula. And so we get this moment where Buddy Love was to consistently trick Jason and have him either get trapped in this room because Buddy Love was to say like, "Oh, I'm Sherman now." Like, I'm talking to you as Sherman through Buddy Love's body, and I'm gonna tell you now, like, go into this room and find the antidote. And so Jason ends up going into this room, and like Buddy Love like closes the door upon him, and then eventually somewhere down the road also, Buddy Love ends up going and telling Jason, is like, you're gonna have a night with linoleum, blah. He's like, what does that mean? Because he's gonna smack and hit the floor. So Buddy Love goes off to this huge, lavish banquet thing where I guess everybody's gonna be able to fund Buddy Love's project. The Clumps are there, and Purdy's there. Everyone's there to just kind of see what the Nutty Professor is going to put together here. So Buddy is to eventually want to eventually get rid of Sherman forever by continuing to have a stream of this Buddy Love liquid, let's just say, or this concoction or potion or whatever, to eventually kill off Sherman completely, which eventually we end up seeing in the Nutty Professor sequel. That is to be an impossible scenario because both characters eventually need to both exist, or otherwise seemingly one is to kill off the other if one is to fully take control. Because eventually in the sequel, we end up finding out that Sherman wanted to completely try and get rid of Buddy Love, but both of them needed to exist in one entity for one another to be able to live, because eventually if Sherman was to try to get rid of Buddy, Sherman was to also lose part of his intelligence also. So eventually in the sequel, Buddy and Sherman need to coexist to eventually have the best of one another's world, to be able to be seemingly them again, let's just say. So with that said, Sherman is now, or Buddy Love is now at this place to eventually showcase what's really going on. So Buddy Love is to eventually showcase, because time is running out on his potion. So all of a sudden he's to show people what this has all gone to. So Buddy Love is to mention like, haha, I have this potion here that eventually you're going to see me soon transform into a much larger version of myself, and then I'm going to be able to snuff that out. So all of a sudden uh, we start to see Buddy Love, who all of a sudden has this big stomach and all of a sudden has this big butt and big feet and whatever. And so all of a sudden Buddy's like, yeah, like here's to show you that I am going to use this potion to change myself back from skinny to skinny forever, or to a heftier person to a much more skinnier person. So all of a sudden we start to have Sherman and Buddy that are kind of fighting one another off within their own body. Where all of a sudden we see uh, Sherman's chin kind of blow out, and then like we see Sherman like and Eddie kind of fighting one another, or Buddy Love and Sherman kind of fighting one another, and so there's this back and forth where all of a sudden like we have this blown out hand that's kind of slapping Buddy Love, and this is going on back and forth, and so Sherman is trying to take control and all this stuff. So eventually we have like Mama Clump, who ends up like passing out or falling over, and Cletus is like, "Hey, I'm gonna be picking you up all night, like if you keep passing out." So repetitiously, we just see Sherman fighting with himself, and so all of a sudden, that is to eventually just reveal that uh, that Sherman was Buddy all along. And so we, interestingly enough, still have Hartley, who's just like, dude, just give him the money. Like, just like whatever money that you guys want, it's yours. Freaking like, take it. Like, this is going to like eventually be like some kind of freak show that you guys are putting on, but hey, freaking do it. So all of a sudden we have this nice moment where Sherman is confess that eventually what he ended up doing was assuming that people would love Buddy Love, and uh, and eventually that's why he kept up this persona. But then eventually he just decided that like maybe he could uh, do without him at some point and like be himself. And so it's like, ah, that people would actually like Sherman as well as this Buddy Love character. So we now just have Buddy Love in this kind of like wrecked freaking tux that doesn't fit him. And so eventually Jason runs in to eventually give the professor a actual tux that fits. And so both Sherman and Purdy are eventually dancing the night away. And eventually they are to hear that they got the funding, and it seems that everything is going well. And so Sherman's boss is off his back, or Sherman's dean is off his back. And so everybody's to live happily ever after. And like Purdy is to mention about about Buddy Love's eyes, where it's just like she really liked his eyes, but everything else about him, like she couldn't stand. So eventually we find out that seemingly both Purdy and both Sherman are going to just fall in love with one another, and it's all going to be happy endings and everything happening until sequel arrives, and like there might be a different spin of things. I don't remember how the sequel altogether breaks down with who Janet Jackson is in that movie. It's been a while since I've seen the sequel, but I have talked for far too long about this movie. I apologize for how long-winded I was. I apologize how it seemed that I was doing some personal talks and whatever, because a lot of people probably don't care about that. But anyways, Nutty Professor is like a movie that doesn't hold up, but like there's some parts that you can just like, man, the craft of this movie or man, just the things that were there that went off into this gigantic, massive pop culture of a thing. That was the best thing about this movie, was to have this thing eventually spun off and be this massive meme or whichever that eventually just exploded all over the place because eventually people were to find this movie somehow or to find the sequel that came after that and just kind of had a good laugh afterwards. But with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here. I hope that I covered all this movie. There's a lot of stuff to have digested during this film, so really, there might have been something that I might have slipped the cracks, or there's something that I might have forgot about or said that I was going to go into, but didn't. That always is going to happen. I will talk about that every single time that I do a review, because I know I will mess up somewhere. And I know that like there will be some parts where I'll just jump around and just be like, oh yeah, that part. Yeah. So I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.